Year 5 and 6, it's me, Mr. A, back with story time for another day, and the epilogue of Oversea Under Stone by Susan Cooper. The sound of clapping echoed through the glossy pillars of the long museum gallery, and Simon, very pink in the face, threaded his way back to Barney and Jane through the crowd of gravely smiling scholars and dons. The crowd began to move about again, and voices rose in a general clatter all around them. A bright-eyed young man with a notebook materialised at their side. "That was a very nice speech, Simon, if I may say so. This is Jane and Barnabas, isn't it?" Simon blinked at him and nodded. "I'm from the Press Association," said the young man briskly. "Can I just ask you how large a cheque the curator presented you with?" Simon looked down at the envelope in his hand, put his finger nervously in the flap and tore it open. He took out the neatly folded cheque, gazed at it for several moments, and without a word passed it across to Jane. Jane looked at it and swallowed. "It says £100. "Gosh," said Barney. Don't know when this is set. "Well, that's nice," said the young man cheerfully. "Congratulations. Now then, what will you do with it?" They looked at him blankly. "I don't know," said Simon at last. "Oh, come now," the young man persisted. "You must have some idea. What are the things you've always most wanted to buy?" The children looked on at each other helplessly. "Young man," said Great-Uncle Mary's deep voice beside them, "if you were suddenly presented with £100, what would you buy?" The reporter was taken aback. "Well, Precisely," said Great-Uncle Mary. "You don't know, neither do these children. Good afternoon." "Just one more thing," said the young man, unabashed, writing rapid shorthand squiggles in his notebook. "What were you actually doing when you found the thing?" "The Grail, you mean?" Barney said. "Well, yes, that's what you like to call it, isn't it?" said the young man lightly. Barney glared at him indignantly. "We just happened to be exploring a cave," Simon said hastily, "and we found it on a ledge." "Wasn't there talk of someone else having been after it?" "Moonshine," said Great-Uncle Mary firmly. "Now look here, my boy, you go off and talk to the curator, just over there. He knows all about it. These three have had enough excitement for one day." The young man opened his mouth to say something else, looked at Great-Uncle Mary and shut it again. He grinned amiably and disappeared into the crowd, and Great-Uncle Mary steered the children into a quiet corner behind a pillar. "Well," he said, "you'll have your pictures in all the papers tomorrow. You'll be written about in books for years to come by a lot of distinguished scholarly gentlemen. And you've been given £100 by one of the most famous museums in the world, and I must say you all deserve it." "Gummery," said Simon thoughtfully, "I know there'd be no point in telling people the real story behind finding the Grail, but wouldn't it be a good thing to at least warn them about Mr. Hastings? I mean, he got hold of Mrs. Polk and that boy Bill and made them bad, and there's nothing to stop him going and doing it any more." "He is gone," Great-Uncle Mary said. Two owl-like men in heavy spectacles passing bowed respectfully to him, and he nodded vaguely. "I know, but he might come back." Great-Uncle Mary looked down the long gallery, over the heads, and the old closed look came back into his face. "When he does come back," he said, "it will not be as Mr. Hastings." "Wasn't his name really Hastings at all?" Simon said curiously. "I have known him to use many different names," Great-Uncle Mary said, "at many different times." Jane slid one foot unhappily to and fro over the smooth marble floor. "It seems so awful that a vicar should be so bad." "He must have kidded all the bishops and things into thinking he was good," Simon said. "Same as he kidded everyone in Trewisick." "Not at all," Great-Uncle Mary said. Simon stared at him. "But he must have. I mean, they must have heard him preaching sermons on Sundays." "No one heard him preach on Sundays, and I doubt if he has ever met a bishop in his life." Now they were all staring at him in such baffled amazement that the sides of his mouth twitched into a half smile. "It's quite simple. It's what they call the power of suggestion. Our Mr. Hastings was not the vicar of Trewisick, nor anything to do with him. I know the real vicar slightly. He is a tall man as well, though rather thin and about 70 years old. His name is Smith." "But Mr. Hastings lived in the vicarage," Barney said. "It was the vicarage once. Now it's let out to anyone who wants to rent it. The parish council decided years ago that it was much too big for Mr. Smith to live alone in it like a pea in a pod, and they found him a little cottage on the other side of the church." "And when I went to find him," Jane said slowly, trying to remember, "I didn't ask anyone where he lived. I just said to an old man by the church, 'Is that the vicarage?' And all he said was yes. He was a rather bad-tempered old man, I think. And do you know, Gummery, I don't think Mr. Hastings actually told me he was the vicar. I just took it for granted when he said something about his replacing Mr. Hawes Mellor there. But he must have known I thought he was." "Oh yes, he wasn't going to disillusion you until he'd found out what you were up to. He knew perfectly well who you were." "Did he really?" "From the moment he opened his front door." "Oh," said Jane. She thought about it and felt cold. "Oh." "So from that moment we all went on thinking he was the vicar," Simon said. "And if ever we mentioned him to anybody like Mr. Penhallow, they must have thought we meant the real vicar. But Gummery, didn't you know?" Great Uncle Merry chuckled. "No, that's what I thought as well. For some time, well, right up to the last, I entertained the most terrible suspicions of poor harmless Mr. Smith." Barney said unexpectedly, "But if you've been against Mr. Hastings before, surely you couldn't mistake anybody else for him." "He changes," Great Uncle Merry said vaguely, deliberately looking away again. "There is no knowing what he will look like." And there was a finality in the ring of his voice that forbade any further question, as they knew there would always be when they tried to ask more about the mysterious enemy of their days in Trewissick. This was one of the things from Great Uncle Merry's secret world, and even though they had been so much involved, they knew he would keep secrets as he always had. Simon looked down at the cheque in his hand. "We found the Grail," he said, "and everyone seems frightfully excited about it. But it isn't any use on its own, is it? The Cornishman said if whoever found it had other words from him on the second manuscript that we didn't even have a chance to look at, then they'd be able to understand what was written on the Grail and know the secret of it all. But we shan't ever know, because the manuscripts are at the bottom of the sea." Barney said gloomily, "We failed, really." Great Uncle Merry said nothing, and when they looked up at him, hearing only the hum of voices from the crowd, he seemed to be towering over them as tall and still as the pillar at his side. Right, now I'm going to save the rest till tomorrow, and hopefully I'll be child-free. You going to say goodbye, Shani? No, anyway. Right, have a great day, everybody, and I'll be back tomorrow with the final part of Oversea Under Stone. Thanks very much, have a great day. Bye-bye now.